Hello, I'm George Malim, editor of Vanilla Plus, and welcome to today's Vanilla Plus Thought Leadership webinar. As CSPs seek to maximize the profit they generate from their networks, they need to control how that resource is utilized without alienating their customers. The title of today's webinar is How to Encourage Profitable Services, Not Throttle Them. And the webinar will explore how to put effective mobile charging and policy in place. Today we have three speakers: Dan Baker, the founder and chief executive of research firm TRI, Jennifer Fellows, vice president of product management at CSG International, and David Knox, senior product manager also at CSG International. It should be a very stimulating series of presentations, and we'll be opening the floor up to questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dan. Dan.
Hello, George. Thank you very much. Folks, the term policy in terms of network services and customer experience is getting a lot of press attention these days, of course. But I think it's important to realize that policy itself is not really new in telecom. In fact, policy was around in telecom's Jurassic Age when large, slow-moving dinosaurs, also known as public switch telephone companies, roamed the planet. But swift developments in the wireless industry have put a new focus on policy. In fact, lots of telecom software vendors have been busy in the past couple of years offering new policy control solutions, often integrated with wireless charging and billing. Some companies have acquired emerging players in that space. Others have partnered with other companies and growing their own capability in-house. So what's behind this passion for wireless policy? Well, first off, I think policy is seen as a cure for a lot of industry pain. Mobile operators feel cornered by trends that are putting a serious dent in wireless revenue streams. For example, over-the-top players with their web videos, iMessage, email, and VoIP services are hollowing out the core revenue streams of voice, SMS, and MMS. Prepaid operators in developing countries struggle to create stickiness because rivals fiercely compete on the basis of price alone. And billing offers based on fancy rating schemes no longer work as well as they used to because competitors have the same tools and can build similar rate plans. Finally, mobile broadband requires huge investments, but without a better way to guarantee QoS at peak hours, users grumble and operators' profits get squeezed. So there are plenty of issues out there driving the need for policy solutions. Unfortunately, policy so far has not really delivered the goods. Despite considerable industry interest and vendor mergers and acquisitions, the number of solid customer referenceable deployments, I would say, of policy is still very low. And one of the problems I'd like to explore here is that perhaps our approach to policy today is a bit too big tech, and we also need to consider some low tech and other practical alternatives. First of all, the lack of many real-world success stories raises questions. If there were policy solutions out there that you could point to that were delivering value, you can bet that many operators would have the confidence to invest more. Instead, the standards bodies are sometimes stuck explaining theory and can't show how to profitably deploy PCRF-based solutions in an actual mobile business. And cost is another major obstacle in policy deployments. The costs are high because networks are not designed to monitor and bandwidth tweak at a very customer-specific level. If you're a prepaid operator, updating the service logic in the main IN system is usually a multi-million euro project, not to mention the cost of billing and charging integration, of course. And the other issue here is what I would refer to as the user experience issue. I mean, it's challenging to implement policy in a way that doesn't annoy users or push them to competitors. And among the issues here, as you can see, being able to explain your throttling policy to the user. When you choose to cut them off or slow them down, the user is going to know what you're doing. And how do you ensure the services are restored reliably? Bottom line, if policy is perceived as punishing users, then it could actually do more harm than good. I know a lot of you out there are familiar with this Gartner's hype cycle of innovation. It's a handy graph to kind of plot emerging technologies and standards. The theory here is that technologies and industry standards go through a similar cycle of acceptance. Once introduced, each goes through a period of inflated expectations. Then soon after, everybody figures out that it's no longer the silver bullet it was advertised to be. So expectations drop into the trough of disillusionment, and after that, people start to discover the true value, and the acceptance kind of plateaus out. A couple quick examples on the slide here. The lower left, space travel, has been talked about. A few people have paid several $100,000 to fly into space, but it's not really viewed as very realistic yet. Big data appliances, on the other hand, are a pretty hot topic and high-tech these days, so I would judge them now at the peak of their expectation curve. And then on the far right, we have, of course, LCD monitors, which are very mainstream nowadays. So what about policy, wireless policy? Well, I would put them somewhere in the disillusionment trough right now, along with another familiar technology, IMS. And actually, I think IMS is, in wireless, there's a lot of parallels here. IMS, remember, was sold as an essential mobile strategy that would enable things like seamless handoff of a call from a wireline to a wireless phone. And even though IMS was heavily advertised and dozens of conference sessions were devoted to the topic, IMS never took off, really, and I think it's still in the disillusionment trough. And one of the key reasons it failed was that it required a massive network investment, and it had a questionable business ROI. So is a network-heavy policy play another IMS? Maybe not, but it's certainly time to raise a red flag. When asked to buy a high-tech, high-cost solution, your first reaction should be, hey, wait a second, is this the best way to go? Is there a low-tech, low-cost alternative that will achieve the same objective? And the best example of that is what Apple did. While mobile operators were mulling over IMS, Apple created a couple of killer devices that lifted the mobile industry out of its doldrums. Okay, so I think it's time for telecoms to get back to the basics in wireless policy. The mission is clearly in sync with where mobile operators want to go. It's all about synchronizing the three sides of the triangles I have here, delivering greater customer satisfaction, network efficiency, and operator profitability, and doing it all at the same time. And looked at in its broadest sense, policy is pervasive across the telecoms business. It's implicit in the many rules an operator sets for itself, such as where it bills network, how it prices products, what incentives it offers, and what reserved capacity it sets aside, say, for a VIP customer. And a balanced approach is usually best because the various elements of the policy depend on each other somewhat. For example, if you build network capacity in the wrong places, you can't serve the customers you want to reach, and so forth. So I think that the key here is that we have a world of policy options available at our disposal, and it's not a single point solution, but policy is a coordinated strategy that leverages multiple techniques and tools to deliver on policy's promise. And so we need to broaden our perspective on policy. Instead of relying solely on a limited set of complex, high-cost policy strategies, we can employ a wide array of kind of game-winning chess pieces, if you will, network build, shifting loads, pricing, incentives, and many others. And so I think the future is great for low-tech, high customer touch approaches to network policy. And in fact, I think the airline industry has been using these techniques for decades. And, truth be known, the telecom and airline industries are rather similar in many ways. Both industries require building and selling services across an expensive network. Airlines sell services for a network of airplanes. Telecoms sell services for a network of cables and cell towers. Now, where wireless is going is the mobile telecom equivalent of what the airline industry calls yield management. It's using dynamic pricing to sell and distribute mobile services like the airlines sell seats on their airplanes. When there are lots of seats available, such as a month before a flight, you lower your price. When seats are scarce, such as at the day of the flight, you raise prices. So I look forward to what Jennifer and David have to say about the innovative policy cases that CSG is implementing with its carrier customers. But first, I understand it's now time for a short poll question, so I'll turn the presentation back to George.
Thank you, Dan, for setting the scene. That was very interesting. We'll move on now to the first of today's webinar's poll, and what will happen is I'll read the question and the answers out twice, and please vote, and we'll discuss the results at the end of the presentations. So here we go. Poll 1. How might an operator derive the greatest value from integrated policy control and charging? And do select all that apply. The first response is increased revenue from finely differentiated service offerings. The second possible response is improved customer experience, loyalty, and lifetime value. The third is greater control of network usage. And the fourth is better monetization of new data services. I'll read the question and answers to you again. How might an operator derive the greatest value from integrated policy control and charging? Select all that apply. Response 1, increased revenue from finely differentiated service offerings. Response 2, improved customer experience, loyalty, and lifetime value. Response 3, greater control of network usage. Response 4, better monetization of new data services. And it looks to me like the polls are settling down now, so voting is now closed, and I will hand over to Jennifer Fellows, Vice President of Product Management at CSG International. Jennifer.
Thank you, George. Beginning I'd say about 10 years ago, CSPs began to offer those tools to subscribers that could really help them better manage their mobile services. These applications really began with prepaid solutions. As prepaid became much more popular, subscribers demanded better tools to manage their balances and to know in advance when they needed to recharge those accounts. Operators like Hutchison UK became those early leaders in the market, offering their subscribers those real-time spending limits and capabilities to manage the corresponding thresholds and define those notification options. It was those early solutions that really began to provide subscribers with those first self-controlled or self-management applications. Another example of early policy capabilities were around parental control. Many parents were beginning to provide mobile devices to their children, but those parents were really concerned about how those children could safely use voice, messaging, and then the burgeoning mobile internet access. Parents were looking for those tools that allowed them to help with the account management of access, such as disabling the device for use during school hours, prevent overspending on text messages, and offer easy-to-use usage control dashboards and notification options. Operators around the world like AT&T and Vodafone invested in those early applications really to give more freedom to those subscribers. And it's these initial capabilities that served as the foundation that helped usher in the policy management era. From those early days in helping that small portion of the overall subscriber base better manage their services, it's now becoming much more widely accepted that policy management solutions have vastly improved the quality of that user experience. Subscribers using mobile data, and clearly we all know this, at unprecedented volumes. Well, why? It's really for a multiple of reasons. Number one, smartphones have entered the market that suit the various users' needs. There are now so many more choices and varying and lower price points. More than ever, users can move from feature phones to more sophisticated devices that access the mobile internet in particular. Secondly, the mobile user interface is much more intuitive and just plain simpler. That makes access to services like Facebook and Google just one click away, and there you are posting your latest update for all to see. And thirdly, many networks have had significant investment, and there's much more to come. This ensures that mobile experience is fast and a lot more reliable than ever before. And as a result, we've seen this data access explode. In recent reports, I think many of us have seen, tell us that the global mobile data traffic grew 2.6-fold in 2010, tripling for the third straight year. And we can expect to see a 26-fold increase in mobile data and see 90% compound annual growth rate. It's just phenomenal about how fast everything is growing. These usage levels have really surpassed everyone's wildest expectations. Policy and the constraints it initially placed on users really became that de facto solution. But isn't that what users really don't want? And why would operators want to restrict access or prevent users from getting access to their favorite services like Facebook while they're using their network? Policy as a control mechanism was actually hindering the user experience and the operator as well from realizing greater revenues. That's because revenue-generating options were not seriously considered. There was a significant revenue opportunity using a converged charging in this high consumer environment. The consumer doesn't know what a megabyte is or a gigabyte is, so it was important to begin to look at charging services distinctly and not by the actual data consumption. This allows CSPs to give services to consumers who can't afford flat rate pricing plans, for example, for data access. And they can do low-cost things then, like Facebook, which drives up the value and the overall data ecosystem expands. Initially, some CSPs felt notification and spend management capabilities would actually prevent that usage from growing. But in fact, operators actually are realizing higher satisfaction and increases in ARPU. With the realization that they could grow and accelerate when combined with a tightly integrated charging application, could policy be thought of it now as a revenue generator? In fact, we're seeing benefits in customer satisfaction and higher revenue, and we'll explore an example of that later in the session with David's portion. As new data services were rolling out, some operators began struggling with how to boost those data revenues. The pressure to manage high-volume users while trying to increase returns from that growing data use really put many operators in the position where they had to get creative. They needed to evaluate the various services and charging policies, offer innovative charging structures to boost that revenue, all while illustrating more value to that subscriber. But what really helped the case was investing in an integrated charging and policy platform. That tight application of charging and policy not only helped to reinvigorate revenue, but also managed to reduce the overall operation expenses as well, upwards of 30% over multiple non-integrated solutions. There was now the proof that policy control and charging policies can indeed work together to increase revenue while improving that overall customer experience. Now operators could really see spending more with the right mix of tools, applications, and pricing. For those innovative and pioneering operators, policy control basics meant balancing criteria such as spend and time of day, location-based services, customer preferences, and more. Getting it right, however, opened the door to 1. A better customer experience, 2. A more personal and customer-specific service engagement, and 3. Offers that better met those customers' usage or content download needs. And it also allowed operators to redefine and improve their commercial experience, create new revenue streams, and focus on optimizing network resource utilization to support those new and differentiating services really in the most cost-effective way. In fact, the estimation is that mobile network operators can promote more spend by offering new plans and offers that allow sort of bite-sized access and trial offers to new applications. These work particularly well in emerging markets where we're seeing some of the fastest increase in data usage. So for example, if an MNO offers access to a social networking service at a lower cost during a defined period, it can make that service more affordable and attractive to new users, move traffic to off-peak periods, and increase the quality of service and overall experience across its entire operation. This is policy management at its most enlightening, balancing charging, access, and network usage to the benefit of both carrier and customer. Examples like these illustrate how subscribers can be provided with those options and tools that they can use to gain more value from their mobile relationship, resulting in operators seeing more revenue, gaining better utilization for their finite resources, and engendering greater loyalty in their customer base. The partnership relationship that subscribers and operators have long been searching for. Charging and policy applications fully illustrate how important the customer experience has become. Plain and simple, subscribers want choices, and they expect operators to provide the applications they need in exchange for their loyalty. Operators have realized that providing subscribers with tools that give them the control is for their mutual benefit. Customer experience is the final competitive frontier, and policy management applications are helping to align the needs of subscribers and operators much more closely. Customer experience versus customer expectation is the KPI for customer delight. Operators must be keenly focused on the subscriber and their preferences and demands to retain them and grow the revenue from that base. No doubt, mobile broadband requires huge investments, but without a better way to guarantee quality of service at peak hours, especially for those customers paying top dollar, users complain and operators' profits get squeezed. Although the users who are price conscious will actually be more ready to accept that best effort. Giving everyone the same services disappoints the best customers and exceeds the expectation of the lowest value users, and effectively satisfies almost no one. These proactive and popular policy applications help to change the way subscribers could use their devices and self-manage their usage. It's now no longer viewed as a usage limiter, but more like a revenue accelerator. So these benefits are delivered by the combination of charging and policy and are resulting in higher customer satisfaction. As Dan noted, in other industries, we are seeing this customer focus take hold. For example, in the biggest U.S. bank, Bank of America, they launched its mobile website in 2007 and was the first to launch an iPhone banking application. Today, it is the iPhone's most downloaded financial app. This iPhone application benefits are delivered by the combination of charging and policy as well, and are resulting in higher and more improved customer satisfaction. In those banking terms, they found that if you give people more control over their banking on their own terms, you win their loyalty. With more than 2 million of its 59 million customers using its mobile banking application, Bank of America really now lays claim to having the highest adoption rate of mobile banking usage among its entire competitor base. Between 8 and 10% of the bank's mobile banking customers are now new to the bank, and this implies that the mobile control capability was a major influence in the decision to move to that bank. In our market, we are seeing actual benefits from operators who do this, who use policy and charging together. Now at this point, I'd like to hand it over to George to introduce the next poll question.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was very interesting. Just while we're waiting for the poll to come up, I'd just like to remind all the attendees that you're free to ask questions in the Q&A box, which we'll deal with at the end. So if a topic comes up as we're going through the webinar, do feel free to ask a question, and we'll cycle back to that at the end. Now, moving on to the audience poll, question number 2. That will shortly be on your screen. I'll read that out to you twice, and please vote when you're ready. The question is, how successful have CSPs been to date in applying policy control and charging? Select only one of these answers, please. The first answer is very successful. Most CSPs believe it is making a real difference to their customers and revenues. Answer 2, it's early days, but there are some indications of success. Number 3, policy control and charging have not yet had any significant impact on the telecoms business. And I'll read the question and answers again. How successful have CSPs been to date in applying policy control and charging? Select only one response for this poll, please. The first response is very successful. Most CSPs believe it is making a real difference to their customers and revenues. Response 2, it's early days, but there are some indications of success. Response 3, policy control and charging have not yet had any significant impact on the telecoms business. And of course you have the option to not vote at all. It looks like the voting is settling down, so let's close the poll now, and we'll come back to discuss the results at the end. Now I'm going to hand over to David Knox, Senior Product Manager at CSG International. David, looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you, George. So what I wanted to share with you today is some examples and some case studies that we wanted to talk through where we're showing how operators are currently enabling policy and charging, and also looking at some of the new market trends that we're seeing in terms of new types of policies and new types of charging that operators are looking to offer. So I wanted to, first of all, introduce three who many of you will know, obviously, and are very familiar with. multinational 3G mobile operator. They've been actually providing convergent charging and service control to their subscribers globally since they launched in a variety of countries. And you see there some of the examples: UK, Ireland, and as far away as places like Indonesia. They've been providing real-time charging and service control for circuit switched, but also for data services. And the solution that we provide essentially enables them to offer to all of their customer base access to all available services, irrespective of what type of service it is, irrespective of the payment method, whether it's a prepaid or whether you're a prepaid or a postpaid customer. It doesn't matter. You as a customer get access to the same set of services irrespective of how you pay for them. This has obviously led to a better customer experience and more happy customers. It's led to reduced churn rates, and it's also led to some significant numbers of customers coming to 3 from other operators, but also increased, if we look at the increased ARPU and how the ARPU compares to some of the other operators and the competitors, it compares very favourably. So I wanted to now give you a couple of examples of various things that some of the 3 operating companies are doing. The first example here is actually from the UK, and if we look at bill shock as one example of where policy solutions often come into play. Traditionally, bill shock has been seen as a huge problem, especially so in the EU, where regulations have been introduced specifically to deal with the issue of bill shock and spend control on data roaming. Spend limits, however, they are, in their nature, can be seen as being very restrictive and often are rolled out by operators in a restrictive way. However, if you look at the example of 3UK, what they actually do, and you'll see that's actually a real phone screenshot, is what they're doing is actually keeping the consumers informed about how much they're spending on internet usage whilst they're abroad. And they keep you informed with a running total of your spend, and also the ability to buy an add-on product that actually gives you an increased amount of included internet usage. So effectively, what it has gone from being seen as a somewhat restrictive mechanism to a mechanism where it has effectively been turned into an opportunity to not only boost customer satisfaction, but also to increase customer spend, because it makes it very easy for the consumer to buy that add-on product, and that add-on product is something that the customer needs at that particular time as they're using the service, and it makes it very easy for them to actually sign up and receive the benefits of that product, and that is something that consumers are very willing to actually pay for. So by having these regular updates as to how much money you're spending, the consumer obviously can use their services abroad in an informed way, in a way that means that they are not afraid of actually using too much of the service, and in a way which really establishes trust between the consumer and the operator. And ultimately, consumers who are aware of what they're spending and feel that they are not going to come back to a huge bill will ultimately spend more than someone who just turns their data roaming connection off as soon as they get off the plane and looks for the first available Wi-Fi hotspot. The outcomes of this has obviously been a better service experience, increased customer satisfaction, and an increased perception of trust between the operator and the consumers, and ultimately an increased ARPU from data roaming. If we look then at the link into the add-on product, so within that text alert that you get, you can follow a link very easily that takes you to your self-care portal, where you can actually go and buy the add-on product. And if we look at some research that was done in the UK a couple of years ago, 42% of consumers questioned said that they would actually use their phone more if they were aware of their real-time spending. So telling people how much they're spending is not necessarily a bad thing. Another example from Sweden is where a service has been launched to be specifically aimed at the family market and to target family groups. So quite often, if we think of probably of our own situations with parents and children, quite often parents implement their own spend controls on their children by giving them a prepaid handset. Quite often those prepaid handsets may be from different operators, so they may have a different SIM card in each one from a different operator. There's no real loyalty to any operator in particular in that kind of setup, and it makes it very easy for people to swap a SIM card out and go and buy another SIM card which had a better deal. However, what 3 in Sweden realised is that in order to target more effectively the family market, they needed an innovative bundle that would build stickiness across all family members. So giving all of the family members an incentive to use the same operator, and effectively giving parents the ability to enable spend and service controls for the children as they're using their handsets in a more sophisticated way than just giving them a prepaid SIM. So what this package offers effectively is a monthly fee for the family for up to a set number of family members, and it gives them the ability to contact other family members at free or discounted rates. It also gives controls and spend limits over the children's use of services, including data services. So this is again another example of a family policy in action. And if we look at some of the outcomes of that, obviously again it's all about increasing loyalty, gaining market share, especially amongst the family group units, and lowering customer care overheads because a lot of the functionality around setting spend limits and maintaining spend limits is all, and transferring credit actually between family members as well, is all done via a self-care environment. We look at another example, this time from Ireland, and these plans have been launched obviously by other operators other than 3. Quite often we hear them talked about hybrid plans, but this example was from Ireland, where essentially what the plan did was to give the ability for the consumer to cap their bill at a fixed maximum amount, so they could actually use their phone, use their data services and their voice services without fear of actually incurring large charges onto their next bill. So instead of that, what happens is they have a capped monthly spend that they're quite happy and aware of, and then once those limits have been reached before the end of the month, then if they want to continue to use their services, they can, but they would have to top up as if they were a prepaid user. So it really puts the budget and spend control into the hands of the consumer. It enables, obviously, some of the drivers here are conversion of more prepaid customers onto postpaid, and thereby giving more guaranteed revenue. Another key driver for the hybrid use case is extending the reach of smartphones to more market segments without exposing the consumer to high bills or the operator to bad debt. It enables a more predictable inflow of revenue for the operator, and it also enables them, as I say, to position and sell smartphones at subsidised prices to typically what would be prepaid users. The final example I wanted to share with you was 3 in Italy, where they have rolled out a mobile TV service to their subscribers, but quite often with these new services, people are a bit reluctant to try them out and especially sign up to any type of commitment to a new service unless they know it's any good for a start. So what this offer allowed 3 to do was to charge a daily or a weekly rate, so a very short commitment period for access to the service, and then whenever people signed up to that service, they could then be targeted with a marketing campaign with messages to get them to not only give feedback on the service, but also to get them to commit to a longer period of actual financial commitment. So once they're happy with the service, then they're happy to sign up to it for a longer period of time, and obviously at a special discounted rate. So it removes some of the barriers that are typically associated to adoption and trial of new services. So to summarise then, if we look at many of the policies that are in existence today, it's all about throttling and restricting subscriber behaviour, throttling bandwidth, restricting amount of usage that you can use or capping the amount of usage that you've got at the network level. So many operator policies are based on that kind of premise. However, it's been seen time and time again that customers do not want restrictions. They want to use their services whenever they like, wherever they are, and on whatever device they happen to be using at the time. So we've got to find ways of enabling monetization of those services rather than restricting usage and ultimately restricting revenue. So the key takeaway here is that network-based policy control alone is no longer enough, and what's required here really is an intelligent and integrated approach to charging and policy that not only stimulates revenue but also engenders and builds trust with the consumers and the subscribers that are using the services. So a few examples then of where things are going in the market and some new things that are appearing in the market. One of the things we've seen a bit of a seesaw ride over the past few years, from unlimited data to capped data, and now in some cases again even some press releases in the UK this week, operators who had previously gone from unlimited to capped now moving back to unlimited again. We take the example of Three in the UK, whose policy really has always been unlimited data, because firmly of the belief that customers and the average person in the street doesn't want to have to worry about megabytes and counting data. They just want to get access to the internet and access to the services they want. And however, with the realization that for certain things they will have to pay more, so things that have a perceived value, then you pay more for those. And examples are this here, things like adding international add-ons, adding BlackBerry usage, adding internet and email, and adding internet while abroad. So these are all things that can be added to a base plan, but in a very simple and clear to understand way. Another example we've seen across Europe and many other geographies, the rise of multi-device plans. So where an operator will want to target the consumer with an iPhone, but also a tablet, or an iPhone plus a dongle, for example, but tie them together on a single plan, have a shared bucket of data usage between those plans. So that's another thing we've seen that many operators are currently looking at. And if you look at quite often, it's a bit like the family example where all the children have different SIM cards from different operators. The real purpose and the business case behind the multi-device plan is to build loyalty and build stickiness, so that you will have all your devices with the same operator. So you're not going off and buying a SIM card for multiple operators, having a different one for each device. And if we look at the final example, tethering is another interesting example, and the approach that many operators have taken thus far to tethering is to discourage or restrict it. It's very easy with something like the iPhone, because it's a controlled environment, and it's very easy to disable the functionality on the device to enable you to set up tethering in the first place. However, if we look at things like Android devices, where there's much less restrictions on the applications that you can install, it makes tethering very easy to set up, and somebody who's determined to do it will actually do it. However, if you start tethering your connection, obviously the amount of data that you're consuming on your data plan increases greatly. You're using a lot more of the service and using a lot more of the operator's network resources, but not paying any more for it. But again, this is something that research has shown consumers are actually willing to pay more for if they have a perceived value. So again, that could be another add-on option to your base plan where you enable tethering for a fixed fee. So those are some of the examples of things that we see happening in the market today. Okay, I'd just like to hand back to George now to discuss the results of the polls.
Great, thanks very much, David. The poll results will shortly be coming up on screen. So poll 1 is about to come up. And here it is. As we can see, there's a fairly wide spread. Remember, you were allowed to vote more than once, depending on how applicable you think the responses are. So clearly, the most popular response was improved customer experience, loyalty, and lifetime value. In answer to the question, how might an operator derive the greatest value from integrated policy control and charging? However, we have a kind of equal spread on the second, which was increased revenue from finely differentiated service offerings, and the fourth response, better monetization of new data services. So it looks like the priority here is in the customer experience and the ability to monetize from new services, rather than looking at the historical throttle approach, which only just under 47% of you selected. That's still important. So turning to David, is that response in line with what you're seeing among CSPs?
Yes, I would say broadly it is. I'd say there's the realization that there's now a need to do more than just simply control network usage, and actually with advances in network technology, network congestion is actually becoming, not saying it's not an issue, but it's probably less of an issue relative to what it was a few years ago. Really the key thing now is actually about giving subscribers what they want and giving them options and upsell and add-ons that they're willing to pay for.
Okay, great. Turning to Dan, were you expecting that in terms of, it looks to me like it's stimulating loyalty and improving the customer experience is slightly ahead of generating new revenues. Is that what you'd expected to see?
Yeah, I think that they're all in the same ballpark. I mean, I think it's encouraging to see that the network usage is rather low. I think operators have kind of got the picture that, policy is a lot broader than how it was painted only 2 years ago, when people were saying, oh, geez, we've got to, chop off the bandwidth and, really throttle users. I think people are getting the message now.
Sure, thank you. And Jennifer, do you have any observations you'd like to add to the results of this poll?
Yeah, I think it's great that everyone's finally realizing that it really is about the customer. I think people gave it a lot of lip service not that long ago, and this is indicative of the things we've been seeing with the operators that we're working with and the challenges they're facing. So, there's a concerted effort. And so when you see an improved experience, the rest of it, the revenue, the improved monetization, that all comes with it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Let's move on to the second of our polls and talk about the results of them. They're just coming up. Excellent. So the question was, how successful have CSPs been to date in applying policy control and charging? And the option here was to select only one. The clear popular response was policy control and charging have not yet had any significant impact on the telecoms business, although only just under 52% of you thought that. I think perhaps the more accurate answer is the second one, that it's early days and there are some indications of success. And there's some nearly just under 4% of you very optimistic, glass half full people that think policy control and charging has been applied very successfully. I think the second part of that first response is interesting, that most CSPs believe it is making a real difference. I think perhaps it would have been interesting to see most CSPs understand that it can make a real difference. But I think that's probably a fair reflection of the market. What are your views on that, Dan?
Yeah, I think that it makes sense what people are saying here. And I guess, everybody's stacked either the early days or not significant at all. I mean, take a look at the most popular wireless service, broadband service in the world, the iPhone, right? I mean, it really doesn't use policy yet, So we are very much in the early days. And, when we start seeing things being applied in the Apple environment, I think, that use policy, and that's kind of when we graduated into the second tier maybe.
Sure. Jennifer, is this what you expected to see? It doesn't look like terrible news from my point of view. It looks like a very realistic response to what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of the examples we provided are those that are really innovators in this space and grasped early on that, making this integrated charging policy approach was absolutely the right thing, and it was they were ahead of the curve. I think what we're seeing is an evolution from, okay, it looks like I've solved some of the network issues. I'm just kind of handling the capacity. Now I've got to figure out better ways of working with my subscriber base to make it much more usable to them. And I guess just to Dan's point, I don't really see an iPhone being the problem or being the solve here. I see it's the operators being those that are going to solve this issue and make it much more relevant to the subscribers, what they're looking to do, how best to monetize those services. So I think it's working hand in glove. It is taking a look at the evolution, getting all the parts of the organization working together. It used to be very primarily around the network side. Now we're seeing all the groups within the organization realizing we've got to focus on this issue, and we've got to make sure that we're addressing what our subscribers want. And some of the examples we provided are great testaments of those who actually are getting it right.
Sure. Turning to David. David, obviously your presentation kind of focused on the second response, that although it's early days, there are some examples and indications of success. And I think you provided some excellent detail into the types of applications for integrated policy and charging that operators of all types are pursuing. Do you think that that means we're approaching a tipping point where use of integrated policy, control and charging starts to accelerate, or will that take a while longer?
I think, I said it probably is still quite early days, but, there's indications that certain things are happening now as, services get more mass market, and, everybody pretty much has now, 2 to 3 mobile internet devices. Most of us sort of have at least one, but people can have up to 3 or 4 or more. So I think that's putting pressures on service providers to look at ways about how they can actually build loyalty and how they can, prevent people from just, sticking in a different SIM card because they get a better deal. So I think there's other things as well. That some of the very early solutions that were put in place for things like bill shock, they were really put in quite a rush because people needed to meet EU regulations, and there were consequences, monetary consequences for not meeting those regulations. But quite often some of those solutions that were put in were not ideal, and they were put in a hurry. And I think that now that things have settled down, I think that operators will be looking for more sophisticated solutions that link back to charging and increase the level of notifications and real-time, the real-time notifications and feedback that subscribers get, because it's not universal across all operators, as we'll all be aware. Depending on which operator you're using, you kind of have a different experience of how spend control is actually implemented today.
Sure, thank you. Let's open the floor up to Q&A now. We're very keen to keep the discussion interactive, so don't be shy. I won't publicly embarrass you with the question you've asked. We've had a few questions in already, though, so I've got a question that I'd like to direct to Dan Baker. The question is, should policy be viewed as a technical challenge or more of a cultural and organizational one? CSPs may have the tools, but what needs to be done to teach them how to use them effectively? Dan, what's your view on that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of this and that, sure. To some extent, the technical challenges depend on how you implement policy. There are ways that you can redirect, let's say, the charging mechanism into another server, right? And so that requires you not to have to revise or to integrate with the current charging system or the current prepaid system. And so that's, in some ways, that makes it technically easier to implement. However, you still have the classic battle between, IT and network, and when, those guys like to fight with each other to a certain extent and contend, and marketing is in the middle. Marketing wants to run, they want to implement the greatest, latest and greatest things to, help the consumer, help the customer base. And so, it's a little bit of this and that, and you can't say it's one or the other, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Just turning to Jennifer with the same question, because I think CSG International, obviously as a vendor of policy control and integrated charging, has a role to play here in educating the market. I mean, how much of a consultative sell are these types of propositions, and how does CSG International approach operators to explain what the benefits and capabilities are?
Yeah, it's very much a consultative sell because, the technical stuff typically can be addressed fairly straightforward. You need this system to do X, Y, and Z. But when it comes to sort of the internals of how you actually roll it out, how you can ensure that the system and the user experience and the tools that the end user actually can access and see, that's where a lot of time needs to be spent, because in order for these to be taken up and really be useful and see the hockey stick growth and the acceptance and the use of it, it needs to be simple and clear. And as we all know, doing and creating applications that are simple and very, very intuitive for a subscriber, that end user, are very difficult. And it requires a lot of thought, a lot of time, and it requires all the heads around the table to get together and say, okay, from our experience, we see this. We know from a network side, here's your challenge. We know from an IT side, here's your challenge. We know what marketing's looking to do. We often sit in the middle, and we make sure that, we listen to all that's heard and make our recommendations accordingly. But as long as everyone, knows they've got the eye on that subscriber and making sure that there's so much thought and effort put into that whole experience, it will be successful. And that's the role we play with the operators we work with, specifically, to move past some of the siloed applications or viewpoints and bring it all together for that end objective.
Okay, Jennifer, sticking with you, we've got another question here, which is to what extent does integrating real-time charging with policy management unlock the full capabilities of policy? And I guess the question is thinking more in terms of old policy was throttle and choke and protect the network, and new policy integrated with charging means you can sell new propositions and collect the money from them. And that, to what extent does that make the integrated proposition more compelling?
Well, there's a couple areas. I think I touched on it earlier where we talked about the operational efficiency. You don't have to worry about all the integrated components of the PCEF and the PCRF and the charging mechanism and the rules that get set up and then pushed out to the customer. By taking all of that out of the equation, it makes it so much more efficient both in time and cost. And that's one of the main drivers is, there are so many systems that a lot of these operators have, and it's hard to kind of cobble them all together from a legacy perspective. So it's very important to say, what, if we can integrate these two and together in one application, get it out there and address those key things of managing the network and developing those charging policies really effectively, then it just makes life so much easier for the marketers who want to roll things out and be innovative and offer differentiation. From the IT side, you're making my life so much easier because I don't have multiple systems to manage. I can really do this all through one core application that's already integrated, already predefined from an application standpoint, and it has the performance necessary for the network guys to be comfortable with it. So it's really on multiple levels, operational, business process, and market differentiation.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Got a question here that I'd like to assign to David Knox. The question is, can policy really remove the fear factor and enable CSPs to extract profit from cautious types of user? And I guess a cautious type of user would be one that's been burnt with a very high data roaming bill in the past, and now when they travel, toggles roaming data on and off, and the carrier makes no money because the roaming data's off. However, that could be a user that perhaps is willing to pay something for roaming data, but just hasn't been approached in the right way to alleviate their fears. David, do you think that's a key application that policy and integrated charging can resolve?
Well, I think it's, really what we look at here is the added value that having integrated charging with the policy with policy management can actually provide. So if we look back to one of what Dan said initially, are we breeding annoyed users? I think what we could say perhaps is we're certainly breeding cautious users, because someone who's had a large bill, say for example, if we take the example of bill shock again, has had a large bill after they come back from holiday, without having any realisation that they were running up a large bill, is certainly going to be cautious in future. And most people I speak to these days, they actually just disable the data roaming as soon as the plane lands. It's one of the things they do when they switch their phone on, is they also disable data roaming or just leave it permanently off in the first place. So I think it's not really the cautious users that are causing the problem. It's actually the fact that people have been stung already, and they weren't always a cautious user. And I think anything we can do to enable those users to get a view of what they're spending and be told as they go along how much they're spending, will obviously go a long way into regaining that trust and building that relationship back up again. And actually encourage them to use data roaming rather than just find the nearest Wi-Fi hotspot.
Okay, David, thanks very much. I've got another question in here, which is looking slightly ahead, so I'll probably direct that to Jennifer and then Dan Baker. The question is, how many discrete policies do you think will be implemented by the average CSP by 2014, and how will the operator determine which policies they should create and perhaps prioritize? Jennifer?
Well, I think there's going to be a set of basic policies associated with spend, notification, and access. Those will be sort of the table stakes associated with, across all segments. But one of the things I think we're trying to get across here is that it's all about understanding the customer base better and having very specific segmentation strategies and behavioral analysis, which require deeper analytics and proactive understanding, will show that many different policies can be out there. And I think we're also going to see that subscribers will define their own policies. They want the control to do this themselves. And it goes to what David was talking about, trust. A lot of subscribers don't trust the operators. But if you give me the tools that I can take care of my usage the way that I like it, take care of my access the way that it suits my personal preferences, then there's really very little limitation on what can be defined as a policy because it suits the very particular need of those subscribers. And I think that's what we're going to see. As we've pushed more out to subscribers, both on the types of applications they like to use, the access types they like to use, I think there's really, it's difficult to put a limit on things because it's going to be about really the details of what that subscriber wants and what suits them best. I like the idea of being able to set up my policies that make sense for me, both on when I want to use it and what I want to see, and for those in my family because they do things a little bit differently, or restricting certain things for a child, my child in particular, and things I don't want her to see. So I think it's all going to be about learning much more about that subscriber and applying other capabilities such as deeper customer insight, and that will open up the door to basically almost anything that subscriber can do, and the operators need to empower that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Just turning to Dan, I mean, will the number of policies operators put in place cause a problem in the sense that they could spend all their time working out what policies they want to deploy rather than just prioritizing on a few and generating profit? What's your view on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jennifer that, once you get the first, once you get the knack of this thing of getting policies implemented, then you're going to want to implement them at the very lowest levels. I mean, it could be policies very specific to customers even, VIP customers. You might even have policies very specific to those types of folks. Let's say you're signing up as for a mobile broadband plan that includes the New York Times and other services, and you can pick and choose, and you got different policies, and they interact with each other. I mean, the sky's going to be the limit, and we haven't even begun yet to really see how this is going to roll out. It's going to be pretty exciting, I think.
Okay, thank you, Dan. That was a very interesting thing. The sky's the limit, and I think that's perhaps the message we should end on. I'd like to thank all the participants for spending an hour with us today, and I'd like to thank, in particular, our speakers, Dan Baker from TRI, Jennifer Fellows, and David Knox from CSG International. It's been an interesting discussion, and I think it actually lays out the shape of the communications industry for the coming decade, as operators will more clever through the use of policy and integrated charging. Many thanks for joining us today. Goodbye.